I call the January 13th, 2025 school board meeting to order. It is 6:01 p.m. We're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Dr. Hoyk. Here. Mr. Wadier.
Here.
Dr. Worley. Here. Ms. Heimer-Rowland. Here. Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessa Binger.
Here. We have a quorum this evening. Thank you everyone for being here and those in the audience as well. We begin with an opportunity for public comment. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comments, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Is there any public comment in the room this evening to get us started?
Good evening. My name is Troy Woodard. I'm a resident, parent, and a candidate for school board seat number 2. Thank you very much for everything you guys have done to date. We are entering into a phase of extensive change and very large capital projects. So thank you for your consideration and detailed review of all the contract documents so that you can set our community up for long-term success beyond just the limits of maybe this contract or future contracts. I look forward to meeting you all and working with the community to make sure that we're holding everyone accountable for what we are asking of them and is set in their contracts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Say my address. I thought that was part. No. Okay. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Jacobs. I have 3 children currently enrolled at WMS and would like to speak tonight on the recent release of building subs throughout the district. I understand that as a district, there are cuts that need to be made to make up for the previous budgeting errors, but I have a problem when the cuts that are made are to the detriment of our school and district. Letting go of our building subs halfway through the school year not only makes it seem as though we don't value our teachers, but it also negatively impacts our children's education. When a sub is in a classroom, it is more often than not a free day for students. When leaving lesson plans for a sub, the absent teacher has no idea who they are and what their capabilities are. Likewise, the subs don't know the students and vice versa. By having a building sub, all of those issues are gone and it can be like any other day in the classroom. I think it is especially important when factoring in that they already know the students and what their specific needs are. I would now like to specifically speak about how it impacts WMS since that is the school I am obviously most familiar with. We are on track to receiving our Montessori certification, and with that comes a requirement that all our teachers must be Montessori certified. Ms. Isa, our phenomenal building sub, is currently getting her certification, and her job as building sub was counting towards the hours she needs for that certification. In addition to that, I cannot overstate the vital role she plays in our school community. She leads the dance club, the Green Team, which is a student-led initiative regarding recycling, composting, and the effects it has on our planet. She is beloved by students, staff, and parents, and I am asking you to immediately reconsider not only her role, but that of all the building subs and the integral part they play in our students' education. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final public comment in the room this evening? Jamie, is there anything online?
There are no hands raised online.
With that, we will close public comment for the evening. We will next move into the consent agenda. Are there any items in the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and actions? Seeing none, may I have a motion?
It is recommended that the school board approve the consent agenda, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any board discussion on the consent agenda? My primary comment would be to thank all of the folks who provided donations to Tulsa School District. Greatly appreciated for your gifts. Please call roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt,
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley. Yes. Ms. Hammer Rowland.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, and the consent agenda passes. We next move into strategic goal 6 operations. 2025-2026 school year open enrollment seat allocation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity to go ahead and discuss the recommendation for open enrollment seats based on our enrollment projection and staffing needs for the 2025-26 school year. Prior to our meeting this evening, I worked extensively with Luke and his team related to looking at our current enrollment and then projecting what that looks like next year based on some assumptions that we will review. Luke's team, in terms of his administrative assistant support staff, his special education director, have been immensely helpful in putting together these recommendations. As I mentioned, the recommendations are based on our enrollment projection to then prepare staffing. The average JK enrollment for the past 7 years has been 308 students per year. That number is down just a little bit from what it was previously, and that is our projected number for next year. SK is based on our current JK enrollment plus an additional 16%. Again, that is closest to our trend. And then enrollment projections for the other grade levels are a straight roll up of this year. So for instance, this year's first grade would project next year's second grade. We also based our staffing assumptions on the class size ranges that you see. These are very minimally adjusted to what we saw this year with our class size ranges. And our open enrollment capacity is based on 80% of the class size minimum at grade level. Using those class size ranges and assumptions, what this slide shows is what our predicted average class size is by grade level at each of our schools. You'll see that I have noted that there are 4 sections across 3 different schools that are at the high end of the ranges. Invariably, every year we have sections that we monitor to see if they are going to exceed the class size ranges or if we're going to see some other changes in enrollments. Again, these are the sections that we have already identified to go ahead and monitor. I did go ahead and compute what the open enrollment capacity would be if we were to go ahead and add staff members to these sections to bring the class sizes down. It did not have any change on the open enrollment calculation. And I felt it was important that if we're going to have a system of using class size ranges and enrollment projections, to actually utilize it and not forego a conclusion about what our staffing looks like going forward. This past year, again, we used that same process, had sections we were monitoring and came out with what I think are very reasonable and small compared to our peers' class sizes. When we look at our peers in terms of average section sizes, this past fall, we were able to go ahead and again, look at Wauwatosa's class sizes in comparison to peer districts in the area. And we are below average class sizes across all of those sections. And it's important to note that even with those 4 sections that are at the high end of the ranges, as we average those students across all the sections, our average would still remain lower than what we're seeing in other school districts in the area. So based on the projected enrollment, the class sizes, and the number of sections, you can see that our grade capacity is such that our grade capacity is above what we would take for open enrollment. So for instance, our class size at for SK at 17 students requires us to have 18 sections. That gives us a grade capacity of 306, but we have to be under 260 to go ahead and look to open up open enrollment seats in that space. So the recommendation for JK through 5 open enrollment seats is 0. The average class sizes at Longfellow and Whitman, based on the projected sections, you can see what they look like here for next year. Average class sizes in the Milwaukee area school districts are these for this fall. And then the projected enrollment sections required and grade capacity shows that there would not be any recommended open enrollment seats in grades 6 through 12 for next year. Our JK through 12 program is not the only area where we need to look at open enrollment. We also need to look at our special education services and staffing. Again, I mentioned that working with Ms. Stacy Clem is integral in terms of looking at our current needs, capacity, and open enrollment capacity. Based on the needs that we have right now, as well as the staffing to support needs of the students, we would not have any open student or special education space in either cross-categorical program or our therapy services for next year. And the last slide is based on our virtual program, Wisconsin Virtual or Wauwatosa Virtual Academy. Again, based on our class size ranges and our enrollment capacity, we would not have any open enrollment seats available through WVA for next year either. From Mr. Scott Ecker, I thought it was also important to take a look at what our history of open enrollment seats has been in the organization. You can see that for this year, our overall change in open enrollment students was a loss of 16 students compared to last year. And you can also see the forward trend for next year for 2025-26 by opening 0 seats. We would be down 136 open enrollment students compared to this year. And Scott has then also projected what that would look like out for 5 years. And that's all I have for you. What questions may you have?
Questions and comments from the board? Ms. Hammer-Roland.
Can you help me? My internet. I can't fit in very much. Can you help me? Thank you. Can you help me understand how you come up with the open enrollment capacity?
So open enrollment capacity would be 85% of the grade capacity. The grade capacity being based on the class size and the number of sections.
And in theory, then that number is leaving room for inevitable move-ins to the district as well.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the board on this? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next item up for strategical 6 operations. Discussion of audit request for proposal.
And I'm going to invite Jess Hinker to the front to walk us through this topic. For anyone that doesn't know Jess, she's our Director of Finance. So kind of the number two in the business office, integral part of budgeting, running many things in the office. And recently we learned that our auditing firm is going to stop auditing school districts.
So as Scott said, this past November, we were notified by our auditing firm. They were no longer going to service the school districts. So we prepared a request for proposal. We sent it out to 10 companies and we received 4 bids. After analyzing the information that came in and looking at the cost proposals, which are attached for you, we have decided to recommend Lauterbach and Amann. Over the course of 4 years, we could potentially save roughly $30,000 by going with them. They also meet all the auditing standards. They are newer to Wisconsin, but they have already started picking up multiple clients across the district and have worked with multiple clients for the past 2 years, I believe. Do you have any questions about our auditors?
Was the recommendation solely based on the cost comparisons? They're very different. The other 3 are very similar in price.
Correct. It was not based solely on price. We actually had 2 that rose to the top based off of their proposals. After doing an interview and asking more questions of them, the 2 were equal in all aspects except for price. That's how we decided on Lauterbach.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Better.
How much did we pay for our audit like this past year? Or how much have we been paying on average for our old auditing company?
It was, I do not have that in front of me, but I can look it up and get back to you.
Okay.
It was right in this
comparable?
ballpark. Yes, very comparable.
Other questions from the board?
All right. We plan on having this on the consent agenda at the next board meeting. There is no official contract. There is just an engagement letter that we received from the auditors in the spring.
But, may I ask?
Mr. Meyer?
So no contract, but there's an understanding on the fee. There's something in writing.
Yes, we do have their proposal in writing, and that becomes part of their engagement letter.
Okay, that has contractual effect, but there's no document that says contract.
Correct.
Our next item is discussion of owner's representative contract, 2024 capital referendum.
So this is a bit of a repeat for Liz and Jason. We had a discussion at Finance Committee about the concept of an owner's rep. And I would actually invite Liz or Jason to, if you like, kind of tell us about the conversation we had there, because I think you might be able to draw better context than I could.
Sure, go ahead.
So my understanding is that the district is going to hire what are they called?
An owner's rep.
Owner's rep. That pretty much is gonna make sure that our contracts that are signed as part of the referendum are held up. I wasn't ready.
I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. One of the, I should have contacted you again, but one of the ways I'd like to move is to allow the board members that are at the committee to also kind of present what was there. So you're doing great.
Here it is. The recommendation is Building Solutions, and they will provide reports to the committee and to the board. And they have guaranteed a match or to exceed savings through cost savings through contracts that we will sign. The rep will be at monthly board meetings to give us an update or answer questions, and audit reports will also be provided. They're going to help BJS with getting bids and making sure that all aspects of those bids are met throughout the length of the contract. And And that's the notes I have. Jason?
Yeah, I'll add to that, just, in layman's terms, it's, what was presented, it looks like we're hiring somebody, but if you really look into it, we're hiring somebody who is coming in at a zero cost to us. So the way it was explained to me was that, they don't get paid unless they are able to make the physical savings of our budget. So the goal for them is to do more with less, essentially, making sure that VJS and anyone else is being competitive with their bids. I think the example we just said was in the last meeting was like, if there's a roof that needs to be done, BJS may have a preferred vendor they work with. And if it's something like that, the owner's rep would step in and say, no, we should really get competitive bids and let's get those bids. And if they find something that will provide what we need for less money, and my understanding is the costs saved from what it would have been, they get paid a percentage out of that. Is that correct?
Essentially, yeah, there's a guarantee that what we pay them, we will at least save. And generally, well, they'll speak to this in a second. The districts see far more savings than what the owner's rep captures for us. For me, the couple main things are, this is essentially our agent that acts on our behalf between the architect and the construction manager. So it's another set of eyes on both the work that's done, the bids that are put out, making sure that the quality of, say, equipment is actually what was spec'd, things like that. So we're getting what we pay for and not trying to get more than that, making the most of our money.
Yeah, and it's I was gonna say, to go on top of that, I think you probably just said the same, but it's that additional level of oversight that, a project this big that spans this amount of time, that's a full-time job, just overseeing that, and we don't, I mean, at least myself, I would want a third party to make sure that everything is going smoothly and on time, and then we have other people to turn to when we need to know who's accountable for what.
Yeah, and I think I'll invite Kevin and the guys here to come up and briefly explain. They'll be able to explain better than we could, but I think it was a great exercise in exactly what they do, and maybe we already had our kickoff meeting last week, so they could talk briefly about that too.
Mr. Ecker, before you leave, I do have a question that's just for you, man. So if we were going to spend $10 and they find $1 in savings, then we pay them part of the $1. Does that, well, maybe I confess to glossing over this stuff too quickly. What they get paid, what fund does it come from? Because savings itself doesn't put cash in the bank account, right? So it comes from the referendum fund, or?
Correct.
Oh, good. That's what I wanted to hear, because otherwise we'd be kind of cannibalizing our, you know what I'm saying?
It all stays within the
Yes,
referendum funding.
Okay.
With obviously the ultimate goal of finishing on time and on budget.
Okay, so for what we pay to them, we still are using the referendum money. So we aren't really saving referendum money for what we're paying to them. However, we have a quality assurance layer on top of this whole thing. So we with the dollars we spend, we're getting more value from a risk perspective and quality perspective.
So that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Another part is there's a potential that we they're going to be reporting to us on a cadence, right? There's no doubt there's going to be some items on our list that end up over budget and some items on the list that end up under budget. We're going to finish on or under budget, and I would anticipate we'll be having conversations with the board throughout this referendum process that says, hey, the owner's rep has found X dollars in savings. Let's put that in the parking lot for now. And as we get towards the end of the referendum, the board will have some choices to make as far as, do we want to put that money towards something that we weren't able to do? Or do we want to give that back to the taxpayers? So that's the ultimate, is maximizing the available dollars.
So I would argue this really isn't an extra function you're bringing in. This is a function that's part of a good process
Correct, yeah.
and it's something that should be done as a good practice.
Yeah, I don't know of anyone doing a project this size covering this number of buildings that would not have an owner's rep.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Worley.
Sure. So I'm not questioning the concept of owner's rep or using one. I think it's a great idea. But I am curious to know, we have a pretty rigorous decision-making process in that I've seen all of you use in our district. And I'm wondering if the owner's rep will have a similar one, and do we have some input? We just started with our Net Zero Sustainability Committee subcommittee last week, and one of the things that was expressed as part of that is a great interest in being part of the conversations about the referendum projects. So I'm wondering if the person or the group or organization that you put forward has provided what their decision-making process will be. Not just, you said it's not just about dollars, it's about quality. Is it also something that they've worked on in terms of like sustainability and, the outcome of, are they working typically in educational environments? What kind of decision-making tool are they using?
I think if you don't mind, I'll let
that's
Kevin, I figured you're teeing them up maybe.
Okay.
Sit down. You should sit down. Okay.
Would you like me to answer your question first? Great. Yeah, our experience, we primarily, so I'm Kurt, Building Solutions is our company, we're the owner's rep. Thank you for inviting us back. We were involved in your 2018 project as your owner's rep as well. So it's great to be back here. Yeah, our firm primarily works in K-12 environments. Kevin did share that the initiative you guys are looking at as far as energy and efficiency, which I think is great. The way, from a policy standpoint or a goal standpoint, you guys set what those goals are, and then we work towards those and work off with the analysis of efficiency. What are the goals that are set by the committee, and then as we go through each individual project, we see how we can best attain those goals. So as far as background and experience on past projects and sustainable projects, if you're familiar with LEED, I'm LEED accredited myself, so I have that education side, and I've done LEED projects as well. That's one way you can show sustainability, but there's also other ways of just putting targets out there. So yes, very, very have the experience, and we'd be excited about that process of being able to, if there's a target out there, trying to hit those targets and weighing in the different pros and cons for each individual decision to get there.
And can I ask one follow-up? These lists in this great document where it lists the different things that you might do, mentions grants. And potentially, could you tell us a little bit about that? And would it potentially include, to the sustainability topic, do you have any experience with the federal Inflation Reduction Act?
Yes. Yep. Great question. I appreciate that, because we're in did a large solar project, 378 kW, so pretty large project for Nicolay, and probably as you drive down 43, you probably see all the solar panels on there, and that was I spearheaded that to get the tax credits associated with that piece. So they'll get a couple $100,000 back as a tax refund, which is something new for school districts. Usually, if you're not paying taxes, you can't get a tax refund. But in this case, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we will get that. But so that's an example. But we keep an eye out for whatever other grants we can find, depending on when it's happening. So that's something that we will be involved with.
Thank you.
I think an important thing for both the board and the community to know, as a result of the work the staff did in the last referendum, we were under budget across the whole referendum. And as with all things, some buildings were over, some buildings were under, but in general, we delivered back to the taxpayers everything we said we were going to do at a lower rate and did additional projects that we identified that we were not able to cover with our original plan for the referendum, all within the referendum parameters. We were able to do more for the taxpayers than we would have otherwise. So this is something that I think worked really well. And I think,
And on time as well,
yeah, during a
Budget.
pandemic.
on time.
Yeah. So really outstanding work that the staff delivered for the community on the last referendum. So thank you. Any other questions from the board?
One question, maybe, and I know you have the weekly cadences or the cadences at our meetings for updates. Will there be anything that'll be provided on the website or your website or any place for the community to keep track of the projects and things that are going on as they're ongoing?
Yeah, great question. So typically on our projects, we will have our architect that we're working with, PRA, during the design side, provide those monthly updates. So I don't know that we haven't specifically talked about it that I know of with this project yet, but that's a common practice that we will encourage because the public wants to know, right, and be updated. And then when it gets to construction time, we'll ask our construction manager to do a monthly update that is in a format that is easy one-page summary, but keeps everybody up to date. A spot you can put it on the website. So I would expect that to be the case for this project as well.
Thank you.
Later in the agenda, Scott's going to talk about a new transparency website, and that's going to have a referendum section in it as well that the board and public will have access to follow the projects.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda underneath Strategic Goal 6 operations, discussion of GSF contract extension. Mr. Ecker, you're getting your steps in.
Yeah. This I think should be quick. GSF is our cleaning company and our contract has expired with them. We've been negotiating since about November on a new contract. I'll say I've squeezed them about as tight as I can. And the recommendation at the next board meeting will be to accept the contract with GSF. I will say Kevin, the Kevins in our office that run the Buildings and Grounds Department have really worked hard over the last 12 months to get the right number of GSF workers in the right places at the right times. And that gives me great comfort with this going forward that we now have, we've right-sized that contract.
Board questions?
So if I'm reading this right, that contract is roughly 2.4 and then 2.5 million the next 2 years. Is that and I'm asking because I genuinely don't know. Pre-pandemic, what was the annual budget like for similar services? I'm just curious as to whether or not that we're still on par, or are we doing more now that we've gone through that experience? Or were we doing more during it and have pulled back? Kind of like, maybe a little more detail on the contract, on the squeeze.
Would it be right if I brought that to either the finance committee or the board? Because I don't have the experience to know what we were paying before. I imagine at one point we probably employed our own staff of cleaners or custodians or something like that. I don't know what year we would have made the shift. Was anyone on the board at that point?
Yeah.
Mr. Meyer would have been.
Oh. I
Oh,
can't
14.
remember when.
10, 11 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
10,
we actually
11 years,
first
12
met.
years ago. You know, we did, before that, we did food service. Then we did cleaning stuff and some maintenance stuff as well. And those were very hard decisions. Because basically we outsourced, right? So
I'll provide to the board, essentially, kind of want to say a 5-year history of those costs.
Yeah, I mean, really, if, in the finance meeting, that's totally fine. I just wanted a rough picture of kind of here's where it was pre-pandemic, here's where it was during, and here's what we're aiming for now. Are we, like, what kind of curve are we looking at?
now what's the gist of the question about the way we used to do it? Has to do with cost savings or no? What? I sort of wasn't following where you were going.
Yes, if we're looking at roughly $2.5 million of, that's a little over 2% of our budget. That's a big percentage. I'm just curious as to, whether it's consistently been 2% or has it been kind of all over the board, or I don't know. I don't have access to those numbers.
When those roles were employees, costs were significantly more. That's a relative statement, you know, when you're looking for a dollar here and dollar there everywhere, you know, it matters. And it's not just the salaries, there's number of employees you have to manage from an HR perspective. There's, what's it called when someone's injured and they're workers' compensation, sorry. Right, there's all kinds of stuff we don't have to deal with.
My question wasn't about us bringing it in-house. It was related to, since we've started using a vendor, what does it look like? I just want a historical.
So from that starting point,
Yeah,
what are the trends?
it's
All right.
close to that starting point as possible, really.
Okay.
Sure, coming up.
2.5 years ago, district bid this out again. Previous to that, the firm that they had previous to GSF participated in that bid. They lost. GSF was chosen. So I would imagine costs were competitive at that time. And then now we're in that stage right now where their increase was the option for us to engage them on negotiating their increase for an additional 2 years.
Okay.
So there has been competitive bidding on this. I hope that helps.
But I'll provide the,
Yeah,
I completely understand what you're wondering. Yeah.
The finance meeting. Thank you.
Any other board questions in this item? Thank you, Mr. Waltier, for your questions.
Oh, one question. Maybe in that research there, I know that there are inclusions and the things that are baked in. Maybe if there's some detail in there, if this is a consumption model or a value model based on, I know we're in the cleaning or chemical business to buy our own stuff, but I know sometimes with companies of, looks like they're fairly large in our region on there, are we paying for stuff that's on a truck that may go to other places, or is it all, everything that we're consuming is all ours? We can account for every bit of it.
So all the equipment they purchase and maintain, and then the chemicals, GSF I forget the exact terminology, but they make the chemicals in the facilities.
Okay.
With pure tap water through some sort of electrical process so that they can ionization and that kind of thing. So they make 4 basic chemicals for the 4 basics of cleaning: disinfectant, general cleaning, window cleaning, that kind of thing. So it's all produced here. It's safe and EPA registered.
There's one other thing I did just to make sure it's known. It's both cleaning and also snow removal and salting is part of the inclusion, which is kind of you never know here, are we going to get 15 snowstorms or?
The GSF is simply cleaning the facilities.
In the document, it says snow removal and salting of entrances.
So here's an example. It snows tonight and there's an activity like the school board meeting.
Mhm.
The GSF staff person assigned to this building, their responsibility is to keep that sidewalk clear within the vicinity of the parking lot.
Okay.
The rest, the majority of snow removal will be on our staff.
Okay.
So they're just, so our staff will be out here plowing, getting most of the sidewalks. They're just there to kind of treat the sidewalk in the immediate vicinity of the doorway.
Right.
So it's not a substantial part of their work. And I'll point out, like Mr. Meyer said, that we used to have our own staff that worked the buildings at night and they represented Wauwatosa. GSF, we kind of look at them the same way. It's a partnership with them. They're the people that everybody sees, that everybody visits our building, students, staff, parents. They're the first point of contact a lot at nights and on weekends. They staff the building to keep them open. So we consider them an extension of our staff. But they do provide a really good service with an interaction. That all?
Yes, thank you. That will be back on consent. Correct. Next item is discussion of new transparency website.
Tim, I'm going to ask you for the best way to approach this. This is actually live on our website right now. Can I just navigate from here?
I would minimize, find it.
Okay. And then share.
I can pull up.
Okay. Oh, look at that. Okay. So we've been talking for several months. You might remember we created an initial sort of Gantt chart of a transparency page that said, hey, here's some benchmarks we're going to get to. And one of those benchmarks was launching a more robust transparency page. So as of this morning, this is now live on our website. And I just want to show it to you, how to access it, how the public can go in and play with it and download data and just, access essentially whatever they want. So it's housed under the business office or finance and operations. And for a long time, I'm making people dizzy. We've had a financial transparency tab here. So yesterday, had you clicked here, you would have got that Gantt chart. Today, it's going to open up to our transparency page. And this is provided by this software as a service from a company called ClearGov. They service about 1,200 school districts or 1,200 local governments. And you can see that it's kind of like a dashboard, so people can click through. There's multiple tabs at the top. Each has a little bit different information. Sometimes there's breakdowns available. So here we're looking at our students. If you want to see more data, there's a link for a breakdown. And so when I click that, now I can see student enrollment by grade level. I can go back various years and see where we had students, what the cohorts were. Here you can see our kind of different cohorts broken out. I do want to point out, for the purpose of this transparency page, the peer group that we're using is different than the peer group I would normally use with, say, salaries. So for salaries, we need to be competitive in the Metro Milwaukee area. The peer group that we chose to use with this are the districts most like us in terms of student FTEs. So they're more across the state, but when it comes to comparing things like number of staff members, that seems more relevant than someone in the metro area that might have 200 staff members. if we wanted to say view the analysis, it'll even show you then the districts that are part of this peer group. So in this case, we're looking at, I think this is students with low income. So we can see at least in this peer group of like size peers, we're relatively, we have a lower percentage of low income students. And in this group, the two highest would be West Dallas and Wausau, for instance. Okay. I'll demonstrate expenditures. I think that's a little more fun than the revenue side. There's just more to kind of go through. So again, options for multiple years here. We are seeing a breakdown in a pie chart, but you could, if someone prefers a bar chart, you can simply choose bar chart. Everything is downloadable. So there's a button to, let's see, if I click this. Yep, here we have, you see actually by account, and you can download the data by account number, and you can see the actual amount spent. That'd be in the prior year versus the budget for the current year. Okay. If you wanted to see this by, say, something other than fund, you can choose different categories of how to view it. One thing I really like is it also compares our spend on a per student basis. So to kind of get some relativity to this. The employee side has collected all of our employees and then, for instance, compares them with the peer group we chose and the state average. So, here really quickly, we can see here's our student to teacher ratio compared to the state average. Then we have some ratios relative to this peer group. So salaries, for instance, were 1% lower than this peer group. Again, that's different than the Metro peer group. You can see where we are in terms of number of employees, and then by employee group even. So here's our licensed professionals per student compared to the peer average and the state, and then just how we trended over time even. Finally, dashboards, these are things we can customize. So this is where the capital referendum data will exist when we have more. I don't think I have anything in here right now. Yeah, just some rationale. But as we, I just have the full list of projects linked. But as we complete projects, I'll be able to put in here essentially charts by building and what we spent on. I've got all of it broken down. So let's say Eisenhower, ADA project, deferred maintenance project, or there's going to have to be a bucket for both. It's a combined project, but people will be able to track what we spent on those different projects by building as well. So again, it's live right now. We're a little bit trying to find that balance between keeping the essential things here. Sometimes it's easy to go overboard on putting too much, and then people are confused about where to go for what. So Jesse Tuttle, our new communications director, and I are working on finding the right places for the right things, but we're really excited about this.
Mr. Meyer and Mr. Where is the database?
Sure. So we send our data from our ERP system, our financial system, to ClearGov. They run it through their proprietary software. And so this is software as a service. Today I had a data update for them. So we moved a few dollars from account A to account B. I sent them I just loaded to a secure site, the new budget, and I don't know, an hour later it was updated.
So they host the data.
Correct.
And we interface the data to them.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have a batch point to point over a period of time.
Yeah, it's not that sophisticated. It's not doing an overnight download or anything. Just when we have material changes, I send them to them.
Okay, so on demand, a batch file of some sort. And so the database activity is against their database in the cloud, wherever, and not against ours.
Correct.
So we don't have login exposures.
Right, everything here is
Security
static.
exposures, it's all out
Yep.
in their,
Mhm.
in their world. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, so right, it's essentially read only.
Right, and there is no one, no one's coming in through our firewall.
Correct,
To do
correct.
this. Okay. That's nice.
Stole one of my questions there. Second question, and if I can remember it now. Nope, can't remember it. So it wasn't as good as the first one.
Yeah, I'm an integration consultant, so that's.
Not necessarily a question, but more of a comment. In the last 2 minutes, I was able to download a spreadsheet from 2025 with over 100,000 lines of transactions.
You're gonna have a busy night.
So, no, well, the comment that I want to make towards it is, does this help in any way alleviate like open records requests from your department or and or like are we going to make life easier there on that front?
I think in many ways we will, because when we get an open records request right now that's looking for this information, often we have to download it from our system and then send it out. So if someone's requesting something that's available here, now the response can just be, I'll send them the web link and they can go get the data. So absolutely.
What is the cost of this service?
Yeah, the board approved it a few months ago. I'm gonna ballpark, it's like $8,000.
This is amazing.
Yeah, it's there's a phase 2 that I'll be launching later this year. We can create a digital budget book from it as well. So my goal is when we do our preliminary budget this summer, in addition to the paper book, there's also a digital one that many of the graphs work like this, for instance.
So, I'm sorry, I thought I didn't want to interrupt, but will only be around for 4 more months, so I just to try to look through a crystal ball. I could imagine that the consumers of this might find things that will help us doing a lot of data analysis and whatever, maybe some suggestions for us. And on the other hand, it could be used to make people overly sensitive about variances or maybe spending more in one building than another, something well beyond what Dr. Means would ever intend to do. So I would just ask the board be watchful that it's used for, I'm all about open government and transparency. And, but I could also imagine that it could be used to try to bully people around in a sense. And that if too much data is used for things that are not in furtherance of open, effective government, just in furtherance of just disrupting us, I think we'd be a long ways from that. But who knows the unintended consequences? I do think this data is terribly fun for people who like data. I mean, it could really, really help us see things, the kind of brain power it takes, the brain power and the time. I'm sure you could do everything, Mr. Eckert, but it takes time to look at stuff. So, all right. So just to put that out there, we need to be watchful of unintended consequences, and we might have to put some guardrails on this somehow, some way. But I can't see it right now, but everything somehow turns out to be something you didn't intend it to be, good and bad. So, okay, thanks.
Last question. Mr. Eckert, in our peer districts, how many do you know of any that are using this? Or doing anything of this level?
We're one of the few in Wisconsin. Whitefish Bay was using it. I can't find that they are anymore. So I don't know of anyone else in Wisconsin using it right now.
There's a difference between making data transparent and then in public policy, people having opinions on how the money's being used. We can't.
Right.
We can't solve that, nor candidly do we want to. We stand by how we've allocated information. I think as Ms. Hyman Rollins referenced there, the staffing report has been on the website for the last 2 years. And so if people, there's still allegations that we understaff one side of town over the other, which is not accurate. That information is on the website. How people interpret how we utilize the dollars is different than having access to it. And so we're very, very proud of the fact that there's access. Now, there's also healthy public policy conversations around if that's where the information and the resources should be allocated. That's for the public square to have those discussions. But from a staff perspective, we're very proud of the fact that this alleviates and eliminates the allegation that information isn't available. It is available. Then it is up to the public to form their own perspective.
Yeah. I just want to thank Mr. Eckert because when you came onto the board, into the district, you were not coming into an easy situation. And I think you've done more than anyone could have expected when you started. So I want to say thank you. I think we've talked about it in finance, so we're probably one of the, if not the most transparent school district with our finances now and the different things that you have implemented since you started. So I just want to say thank you for that.
That's nice. I appreciate it. No, I'm sorry. I don't take compliments well. What's going through my head is, sorry. What was going through my head is I want to make sure I thank my staff who, some of whom are here, but I guess I'm up here today, but it's in large part because of what they've been able to do also in our office. So I want to make sure that I get that word across them more eloquently than I did just now. So thank you.
Any other board questions?
Sure, I will comment. I would suggest you make this available to the certification schools for student projects.
I'm sorry,
Let them know. Well, in the business manager licensure courses, they're required to do.
Oh, I see.
Projects.
Sure.
I mean, this is just a wonderful set of data for people to practice on how to manage and to come up with ideas. So I would, yeah, even within our own school, I would encourage you to partner with just me talking. I mean, what certification programs are left? A lot of them have ended, closed and things like that. But this is just a wealth of good data for people to practice thinking about managing education. I think that's a really, really good thing. I don't want to be heard as expressing any doubts or negatives about this. I think it's a really, really great idea. So when I was taking my classes, I wish there'd have been something available to do a seminar project or something like that.
I like that idea. Thank you.
Is there any additional information on the multi-year budget projections?
That's a separate topic.
I know, just leading into it.
Oh, I'm ready for that topic if you are.
So you have to get.
I'm off tonight. The humor is not running well. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Eckert, thank you for your work on this. I know there's a lot of work going into communication. I know my colleagues in the Finance and Operations Committee, thank you for your continued work on this as well. Tonight we approved the audit recommendation and accepted the audit as a board. So lots of things coming together, continue to make sure that there's good financial oversight. So thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will move into our multi-year budget projections, Mr. Eckert.
Perfect. Thank you.
The floor remains yours.
All right, Tim,
As
how do you
Mr.
want
Eckert is
to-
making the transition to the next presentation, I think I want to just emphasize what Ms. Hyman Rollins shared. We asked Mr. Eckert to run a sprint immediately when he came on board, well, candidly before he started. And he has met every challenge. And so on behalf of the board, again, Mr. Eckert and your team deserves a lot of credit. This next item, 4F, is critical to ensuring that whatever budgets we deal with and whatever challenges we have in front of us in terms of budgeting, we know what they are ahead of time. A good organization has the ability to have a multi-year budget projection out ahead of itself. Mr. Ecker has taken on the challenge. I've been in districts where we typically do a 3-year projection. What you're going to hear tonight is a 5-year projection. Now, I think you're going to also hear from him that it is critical that we don't hold these numbers true going out 4 or 5 years, but at least we know what's ahead of us for the next few years, and we can candidly, from a governance standpoint and from an operational standpoint, make good decisions. And so we're really excited to present this presentation to you. So Scott, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. And I think I'll preface by saying the Finance Committee has had not a preview into the projection, but we had some significant conversation at the Finance Committee about the assumptions that would be used for the projection, because that any kind of projection or scenarios are only as good as those assumptions. And those are detailed here as well. But first, I wanted to just talk about the difference between a forecast versus a budget. And in my prior role working with school business officials and superintendents and school boards, those two things are related, but I oftentimes found my peers confusing a projection with a budget. And they're two very different things. They work together, but I want to make sure that we're clear on what each of these is. And I want to point out a little bit what the differences of those are. And so today we're focused on a forecast. And the reason we need a forecast is to guide our future decision making, so that we can make good, relevant decisions based on where we think we're going to be relative to finances. As opposed to a budget, which is really marked to be a point in time, normally 12 months, and it's about sticking to a precise plan. So a forecast, you'll see there's going to be multiple projections based on what ifs. We can modify that frequently over the course of the 5 years in this case. That's very different from a budget where that's there's certainty with that, or there should be, and is not as fluid by design as a forecast. I talked about time frame. Level of detail obviously is different. We're not going to produce a forecast. Jason said he downloaded 100,000 line items, right? That's a budget. It would be impossible to create a forecast for 5 years with 100,000 line items. So I'm not forecasting. Like say right now, let's pretend we have 5 social studies teachers. I'm forecasting we'll still have 5 social studies teachers. They may not be the exact same people. When we actually build the budget, I'm putting in who those 5 people are at a level of granularity so I know exactly what they're going to cost. That would be an example of a difference there. Same thing with, say, utilities are a good example. I tell you what, I got my utility bill at home the last month, and I was surprised by we. But I am projecting utilities at a certain rate based on historical practice. That's something that likely will get updated year over year as we have more information. So the assumptions used in kind of the baseline of these scenarios, we have 3 main categories: revenues, enrollment, and expenses. So our revenues at any time we are ending a biennium are the hardest things to predict because we don't know what the state's going to do. So I've always found best practice to be to use the current state statute. There's even more assurances, I guess, this year than many, given the governor's line item veto a couple of years ago that cast forward the per pupil increase for, I believe it was 400 years. that's unlikely to stay there for 400 years, but there's more certainty with that next year than there has been in prior bienniums. There's a lot of talk about what could happen with special education aid. Certainly, it would help our district immensely if special education aid went up. I don't think it's prudent, though, to build a forecast based on something other than current state statute. I do want to point out the third item down, this property tax exempt aid. We received this, you might recall, for the first time last fall. And it's about $1.4 million. It's unclear in statute whether that was a one-time payment to school districts or is going to be an ongoing payment. At this point, I'm recommending that we assume we won't get this again, build our budget, eventually we'll pivot the budget. And until we have certainty of whether we're getting that money or not, I'd rather have this as a good surprise later than account for revenue we may not get. So that's my kind of my conservative nature there. On an enrollment standpoint, we're using a 5-year cohort survival rate. So the way that we calculate that is I'll look back over 5 years and I'll say how many first graders on average make it to second grade. That might be 98%, it might be 102%, but I'll do that grade by grade and find the 5-year average that how many normally make it from first grade to second grade, and that becomes our enrollment estimate. The good news with our enrollment estimate is it doesn't impact our revenue very much, frankly. Because of our size district and we're in declining enrollment now, if we go up by 100 students or down by 100 students, it's not going to impact our revenue. Now, those changes potentially could impact the staffing plan, right? So on the expense side, it would impact things. But if we were at a district that had 600 students in the whole district and they surprisingly go down by, say, 20 students, that can have a drastic impact on a district like that. So I just want to point out if we end up being off 5 students from the projection, that's not going to have an impact on revenue. We just heard about open enrollment, but that's also built in the reduction of essentially seniors graduating out and not backfilling them. On the personnel side, right now it's built as a flat staffing plan, with the exception of I've built in a reduction of 15 FTE to offset the open enrollment loss of revenue. As far as salaries and benefits go, I really want to move us to considering salaries and benefits as a total compensation plan. So we have to make sure that we are budgeting our benefits as well as our salaries as a in totality. To do one without the other leads to surprises, frankly, like we had this fall with health insurance. So right now, the assumption is a 4.42% total comp. That equates to a 4% health and 8%, 4% salary, 8% health insurance increase. If health insurance were to be 10%, we would need to say, what can we do with salaries to still get to 4.42? Likewise, if health insurance were only 6%, that would give us more room with salaries. And then finally, other expenses have all been built in with just a 3% inflationary increase. So that's all the assumptions there. Any questions about these?
Does the compensation, does that include the 8 million that was set aside in the operational referendum for increases for staff?
What we can afford is 4.42. And that it meets the everything, that might be on the next slide, actually.
Or maybe there's a different way.
My intent was to include it here. Everything that we are required to do by the operating referendum is included as part of these projections.
Okay.
You both said something very different. So I want to make sure there's clarity. So you asked the question, does that $8 million just get earmarked
Mhm.
as funding for compensation? That's not what Mr. Ecker just said.
Correct.
So help me understand that, because that was specifically how we set out in the referendum. How we chose that specific dollar amount.
So here's how I answer that. I don't know what the board would have given as an increase had there not been a referendum. So that number is somewhat arbitrary because it could have been a salary freeze. So $8 million over a salary freeze certainly is accounted for. So I don't know what the beginning point was, which is why I can confidently say we're living up to what the referendum requires us to do. I'll say it another way.
Yeah, no, I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, if what we were, I mean, I don't know, I guess we weren't that granular about what were we intending. In my mind, it was, here's where we're at for compensation. We're taking that and we're taking this extra 8 million if the referendum passed, and we're dispersing it appropriately to staff. Not, we're starting at zero.
If we didn't have the referendum, I would be coming now and saying our total comp should be 2%, 1% salary, 8% health. So I'm not trying to skirt the question.
Mhm.
The hard part is we don't know how many people we'd even have here had the referendum not passed. And again, we don't know what the starting point was. We said, yes, we would use some for salaries, but we don't know what the baseline was for salaries.
Yeah.
So maybe a different way of asking that, the $8 million, we would have been short $8 million next year. Right? Is that?
Oh, if the referendum had not passed, we'd be short $14 million next year.
Okay. Just so what I'm trying to, I guess, ask is the funds from the operating referendum, they are kind of like their own fund, right? Like they're going to get dispersed where they need to be to align with the budget that we approve, right?
Yeah. So maybe here's another way to look at it, or maybe I'm getting confused the matter more. I don't know. Right now, we have, I'd have to scroll down to see exactly, but I think it's a little over $1 million surplus that we hope we can maybe build back into fund balance. If we weren't committed to giving that extra salaries, I could come to the board today and say, hey, let's put $3 million into fund balance next year. I can't do that because we're committed to paying that out in salaries. Is that maybe a fairer way of saying that?
How much of an increase will we see in the amount of money going towards compensation from last year to this year? Recognizing there's a whole lot of moving parts. Do we have a ballpark number?
Let's see. I had it a few months ago for us. I don't want to say something and then I'm wrong, and I absolutely can get it to you. I could probably go to the transparency site right now, and figure it out.
Because I think and I think the goal of the referendum was to prioritize and continuing to increase teacher compensation in ways that would make us continue us to move beyond being. We were well under average in salary, not in benefits, but in salary. We are now what you're articulating is it is wisest for us to look at total compensation, benefit costs, as well as salary at the teacher level. and that we need to continue to move that and invest more resources there. This is doing that at a 4% increase over last year. That includes both money to continue to stabilize cost of benefits, primarily health insurance, but everything else that's in there too. And then a 4% increase in salary.
Correct.
And that will be how that really shakes out as we get closer to budget season is where's our health insurance and other insurance costs trending? Because we're self-insured. And what's the balance? Could be that higher the less we pay in insurance costs, the more we can give in salary. Question I have is, as we give more in salary, so if this year we were able to give 5% because our health insurance costs are down, we're then committed to that year over year.
Correct.
And then if next year comes out, health insurance is 12%. What is, one of the things I'm curious about, and we'll be curious to hear whether it's this board or the next board, is once we've committed to higher salaries, it's such a large percentage of our budget, we can't peel back from that. No. So there's a balance of like, as a board, I've heard pretty consistently, we want to pay our teachers more. Teachers are the lifeblood of the organization. And how can we do that in a way that's sustainable? And so I think that will be really important information for the board to grapple with as we move forward, not just in this year. What does it look like? Because it's a long-term commitment. Ideally, we may be committing to a teacher for 15, 20 years.
We hope. Yeah.
We want long-term relationships with our educators, particularly the great ones.
Can you clarify what you mean by if we give them, if they get a 5% increase, we have to do that the next year? What do you mean by that?
The increase is going to, once we're committed to that 5% increase, it's increasing all of our salaries that much more year over year. And it is difficult to continue that pace of increases when maybe you have to invest in other places. So it gives you less flexible spending. It's not a one-time investment in resources. And so I think it's really important. There's gonna be the boards in the future will have some challenges because we will also be shrinking the organization. So how we shrink the organization is we divest from open enrollment, because the students will drift out of the secondary schools last. But in some ways, the secondary schools have the most flexibility in staffing. And so there's a complicated nature to grapple with this. And I know there's smart people thinking about this, but it's a lot of moving parts. There's not stability in the organization in the short term. There's a lot of dynamic opportunities here.
Well, there's going to be change. Stability maybe is a little bit different word from change. I know what you're saying, but I'd say let's start off for sure and say there's going to be change in some significant fundamental parameters, but we could take a stable path into it or an unstable path into it.
And the community has given an incredible gift of investment in education.
So
all things considered,
my guess is that you prefer the word change over instability. If we manage
there won't be stability.
There won't be. Yeah, you said there won't be. Well, there could. I'm trying to help your argument here. I would prefer the word we're not going to be static, we're going to change. And if we manage our change well, we will be stable. If we don't manage our change well, we could risk instability or not stable.
So, I guess just, because I've heard a lot of different things to clarify. So what you're saying is that you're using the assumption of an overall compensation on a per employee basis of 4.42% year over year. And to what Eric was saying, that we are committing to that. That's the difference is if I get a 4.42% raise this year versus a 4.42% bonus. There's a big difference in that. I get the same amount of money for the next year, but when I get a bonus, the employer is not on the hook for paying that same amount the following year or years after. If I get the raise, unless someone does something to affect performance or change position, you can't from an HR perspective, you can't just take the money away unless there's valid reason. You can't reduce someone's salary unless there's a valid reason. That's I think my understanding and summarizes it.
One of the items that the teachers union asked Ms. Zelazowski and I, when we started working on developing an actual teacher salary schedule, is to make sure the compensation was visible. So that's the first word, visible. It wasn't visible before. There was no schedule. The second term that they used was predictable. So I think what Dr. Jessup Anger is sharing is that when it is not a bonus, but it's a compensation package that's built on the previous year that is visible because you can predict and see, is visible in terms of what you can see it's going to happen from year to year, and is predictable. What Mr. Ecker is stating is that in order for us to have a better control of our finances long term, we can't continue to talk about this in silos of here's teacher salary and here's the cost for insurance. That prior to Act 10, we talked about compensation this way for educators all the time in terms of total compensation package. It allowed a governing board and an administration to better manage and predict what we had to pay for. So I think we're throwing out a lot of different concepts, but to try to bring it all in-house, we are meeting the needs of the union. When we met with them, they wanted compensation to be visible and predictable. We're doing it. I think what Mr. Ecker is stating, and I think what the community has shared with us is they also need to have something that is predictable. Because if it is the will of the governing board to go above 4.42%, then we just need to know, and then we'll have to make subsequent cuts to go above that. And I think a lot of the number one question that I received leading up to the referendum was, does this end it? Does this end the need for us to continue to go beyond what the taxes are going to call for? It may not, if the goal is to go above the 4.42% for total compensation. It may not if the state legislature continues to underfund public education. So there's a lot of variables that Mr. Ecker would say in his 5-year plan that he can't control. But the 4.42% at least gives us a starting point.
This is the conversation that sort of starts to bleed into budgeting. And I completely understand it. But I just want to reinforce, there'll be a separate board meeting where we propose raises and the board hasn't approved a staffing plan yet. These are simply baseline assumptions. So we have an approximation of where we'll be 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, with lots of decisions for the board to make between now and then.
So I agree and take your argument well that 100 students isn't a big deal unless it's 100 down 3 years in a row, then it starts to be a bigger deal than a not big deal. Mm-hmm. That has not happened. We were, 5,650, 57, 5,800 resident students. Now we're below 5,500. So we're a couple hundred less than we had been. If that stays where it is, well, talking forecasting, what direction are things going in? Right. So if that direction continues to go in a way that we don't like, that has to be noticed somehow. Another thing is, as we wind down open enrollment, the average state aid for a student in front of a teacher will increase
Correct.
over the next 4 or 5 years. That's a good direction for the wind to be blowing for that. The premise of open enrollment was to increase revenue from buildings, because buildings were cost centers. And so you really are using open enrollment to cover building costs, because like you said, teachers are a variable cost, more or less students, right? So we should, fundamentals are kind of going in the right direction because we're reducing open enrollment, but there's going to be some transition cost. And we funded that with the referendum. I would think, I'm assuming, just jump ahead, the operating referendum has to be renewed, theoretically. But if we come to the community 3, 4 years from now and say, okay, we had an operating referendum of X dollars 4 years ago. We've done all these things to make it better. So we still need an operating referendum, but it's only this percentage of what the last one was. So, make that case to the community. It'd be, so things are looking good. For 20 years, elementary enrollment has been stable. And if you look at it year in and year out, with the roll-ups from second to third to fourth, some years you win, some years you lose. You can't really, but if you look at it for 20 years, you say, well, it's still pretty much the same for 20 years. Same thing within the middle school, same thing within the high school. But we always had an increase between elementary to middle school and middle school to high school. We haven't had such big increases from middle to school to high school the last couple of years. So of course that increase, if it's an average of 40 a year, and we don't get that 40 for 4 years, well, that's 160, right? 160 students. And now you're starting to talk real money. But I just always looked at it like whatever was happening, if it was different next year, no big deal. We watch it for 2, 3, 4 years and see what happens. So I'd say just watch how that goes. See, on the big 25, you have 25 years of data 4 years from now. If we have a new normal, well, we have a new normal. And if we're increasing from middle school to high school, if it bounces back, well, now we know that. If it doesn't bounce back, now we know that. We're still going to have the same number of high schools. We just have to add the year in, year out budget our teachers. So it does look positive for what you're saying.
Why don't, I want to talk about some of the priorities, because you're as we move along, you're going to see early years of the projection. We have small surpluses. Later years, the projection, we have deficits. So I just kind of want to ground ourselves in sometimes having additional money is as challenging as not having enough, because when you have additional, everybody wants it. And so I just want to ground ourselves a little bit in here's some of the priorities that are challenges for us, right? And frankly, no school district is ever going to say they have enough money. And we don't have enough to offset every challenge we have. So I just want to remind the board, we have these, in some ways, competing interests here even, of rebuilding the fund balance. We have I'll say we have a temporary solution to our deferred maintenance issue via the referendum. Unless our solution every 5 years is going to be a capital referendum, we don't have a real solution to deferred maintenance. So we still have that to grapple with. And I'm including there things like equipment replacement cycles. I have not been able to find a equipment replacement cycle. I can for technology, but not for things like, I'll give you an example. We just had some rigging that we need to fix in our theaters. We don't have a replacement cycle for things like that. We're always going to want equitable access for students to, resources. One of our top priorities we talked about is recruiting and maintaining high quality staff. We will be right sizing budgets. Some need to go up, some need to come down. And then we need to honor prior commitments too. So all of these things are going to be rolled into both forecasting and budgeting when we get to that. So the remaining variables that are still out there, we talked about special ed reimbursement, the per pupil increase, that's unlikely to change. Enrollment is one of those we're keeping an eye on, obviously. And then I mentioned the $1.4 million in for that property tax exempt. So I built 3 scenarios. One thing I always coached my clients on with forecasting is I would tell them there's 100% chance if you built one scenario that it's not going to happen. Like that's the one thing we know for sure. It's impossible that a forecast is going to be to the dollar 3 years out. So I think it's important to build multiple scenarios, especially as you're looking in the out years and knowing, hey, here's the range of possibilities based on some of these things that we're talking about. So there's various scenarios here, and you can see the assumptions used for those. And then here's kind of I guess this would be the takeaway is you can see our current year, right, is to the far left. So that's showing our roughly $9.4 million fund balance expenditure. Right now, we're projecting a surplus of about $1.8 million next year. Again, that accounts for everything required by the referendum. It doesn't account for putting any money into any of these competing interests right now. So that's what will be when we pivot to budgeting. These are some of the things we're going to be talking about relative to that $1.8 million. The second year of the biennium, we're also in very good shape. By the third, I was going to say the third year of the biennium. That would be a different biennium. By the third year of the forecast, we're starting to see us using up all of our resources. So we know. I almost hesitated to bring to include the scenario 1, which is the worst case, because I know it's our duty as a cabinet and as a board to not let things get there. But what I wanted to show is if we make no changes at all over the next 4 years, that's what we'd be facing. So Mr. Meyer's point, for instance, as we decline in enrollment, we'll have to look at our staffing so that we make sure we don't end up at that point. Okay. So I just want to show this is what your status quo would be, and then knowing we need to make changes where we'll be. And then finally, you can see in 2030, that's the first year of non-referendum money. So we had a non-recurring referendum that's good through 2028, 29. That money will evaporate from the district in 29, 30, which will leave us with a few options. So here's my recommendations right now as we pivot into budgeting. I would recommend that we not make any increases to expenses when we pivot into budgeting that go beyond 1 year. So, 1 year adjustments to fix things, kind of like you're talking about, that might be it'll be on payroll, it could be on capital projects. But if we choose to fix theater rigging, we only have to do that one time, hopefully. And then we can scale back the next year. So those, as I'm thinking about what I'd be presenting to the board later, it's to the extent we even decide to spend money and not put it all in the fund balance, it's going to be these one-time expenditures. I just want to emphasize beyond the current biennium, projections become much less predictable. So while I want to provide a 5-year plan, frankly, I'm really focused on next year and the year after that that's where my effort will go. And every year we update the 5-year plan. And to balance in 29-30, we will have to do some combination of additional staff cuts, school consolidation. There could be a change in state law. That's not up to us. And or referendum to replace the expiring referendum. Perhaps some combination of all those. And finally, on my to-do list, and this is sort of the holy grail for school districts, is developing some kind of scientific evaluation period, process to evaluate our spending essentially. What is called academic return on investment. So what kind of return on investment are we getting for things that we're implementing or things we've always been doing? And this is the last slide. This is just about that transitioning from projections to budget. We'll be, and you can see in the little circles, all of these things in the circles will essentially or eventually get finalized, and we'll just be providing board updates throughout that process. As each of these things get final, we're able to make our budget more granular and eventually present that preliminary budget to the board in the summer and then the final budget to the board in the fall.
Please, can you go back to your 4 or 5 years of bar charts there? So yeah, there. So if you look at like 4 years from now, before the bars all go downhill, where will we be? We will have be a long ways towards the elementary buildings being K-6. Fundamental change. We will be a long ways towards a much higher percentage of students in front of the teachers in those elementary buildings being resident students, generating more revenue.
They won't generate more revenue.
Well,
of our revenue,
yeah,
more will be from the state than
okay.
from local taxpayers.
Okay, all right. Thank you for the correction. But we'll be in a better place as far as fundamentals when we go to make decisions then. And our teaching organization would have had 4 years of our salaries benefit structure we developed in this era. Will be a lot of things will be set and known and well liked in theory. You know, we will have the benefit of the deferred maintenance having been done. So it looks like we're just holding our own over those 3 years where the bars are pretty short, but actually we're accomplishing quite a bit.
Yeah, well said. Right. The board made really significant decisions last fall that we'll be able to implement that we wouldn't be able to implement otherwise. And we're in large part in good shape as we move forward with that.
Yes. So it almost seems like you can't look at these bars in a silo. You have to look at the context. And it looks like, well, we're just holding our own and nothing got too much significantly better. But actually, the organization itself changed in a profound way and will arguably be a much stronger, steadier organization then. So without spending more money, we would have accomplished great things.
Yeah, I don't want to ever say that we have enough staff. I think there will always be an argument. That conversation today, it depends on your perspective. There will always be someone that will say there's not enough staff. There will also be people who will say this is a sad conversation to have because we don't have enough time to determine if the staff that we have can sustain the positive trajectory that we have. But without an injection of more or different revenue streams, there will eventually become a time where we will have to look at the existing staffing and say we have to reduce it. Or the community will have to come to grips with the fact that maybe we need another injection of revenue. This current board made the determination based on the strategic plan. Specifically, I think it was 4.4 of the strategic plan that said, we want to make sure, I think the actual line was, we want to have our teaching staff be in the top 10% of the Milwaukee metropolitan area. Knowing that the timeline to have a community-wide conversation around a referendum was in the long term, the administration and board decided that the short-term strategy would be to use the healthy fund balance. I think we didn't, in retrospect, in terms of continuous improvement, one thing that I could have done a better job in is continuously, every time we had a meeting, remind the community, this is where we are. And the decisions that we were making were not made in isolation, but there was a strategy. And so I think whoever's on the board moving forward will have to continue to look at the history of what this board did and then decide, what do you want to do moving forward? There's no guarantee that a future board wants to make the type of commitments that the strategic plan laid out. But there were some difficult decisions that needed to be made in order for that plan to be in place. I think what Mr. Ecker and I are now in a position of deciding, I think this is, again, I want to start where I started in kicking this off with Mr. Ecker about a half hour ago. I'm used to a 3-year plan like this. I'm almost including year 4. This is the first time I've had this, that I've had this type of tool, let alone the board. I think we can be very strategic now. And the decisions that we will make, I'm not going to say that they're going to be easy, but I think they're easier and they're more transparent and clearer because we have this type of tool. So thank you, Mr. Ecker. And more to come.
Just have one question back on your scenarios slide. Number 4 said we can't use fund balance as a way to offset deficits. So scenarios 2 and 3 will have to be avoided. But you also said you were hesitant to put scenario 1 on here. So that just seems conflicting to me.
I think there's another slide. If Tim is driving or whoever, I think what Mr. Wadier is speaking to is another slide, not this slide.
2 slides down.
Well, yeah, number 4.
Number 4 there. I'm confused.
I think it should say 1 and 2.
Okay.
Yeah. Typo, thank you.
Okay.
That
Now
is
I'm not
confusing.
confused.
We can't let the blue or red happen. That's the.
Right. I think I'll just conclude, because I know we have other items. We committed in this past summer to being more transparent and being more strategic. These are the types of tools that allow not only the board, but the community to monitor what we're doing, and to watch us. And so we welcome people to not only monitor where we're going, but also to give perspective. And I'm thankful again to the entire business office team for creating these tools. These should be the governing tools that now the board wrestles with, and how you leverage it and how you move the valves, if you will then give us direction on how we can then operate and run the school system. So thank you.
Any final board questions? Not. That will move us into the final item in the section, overview of account structure and move forward.
I know Mr. Myers is excited about this agenda item. I don't know about anyone else. Often there will be community members who will say, can we have access to your budgets? And then these are people who are highly skilled in the private sector and other places. And then they'll come to Mr. Ecker and I and say, this doesn't make any sense. This is what is this? Public sector accounting is just different than other types of accounting. And so Mr. Ecker is going to give us an exciting dive into what public sector accounting looks like for public schools.
The exciting part is this is intended to be fast.
Oh, we can fix that.
The finance committee had said, hey, maybe it'd be helpful just to have a primer on that the board could go to when needed to understand codes a little better. So I included a couple downloads here for you. One is a Word document that just explains what each code is, so that instead of, you probably know Fund 10 is the general fund, but what does that mean? So you can find it quickly, and there's a brief explanation of what that is. Object 400 is non-capital objects. That doesn't mean anything to most people. So if you scroll and find that on the Word document, it's going to give us more detail about what that is. So that's item number one. Did you say the other one was the most unique PowerPoint you've received? I think that's then this one, the cipher, right? So when I first got into school districts, I had no idea what these codes meant. And frankly, most of our teachers and a lot of our administrators don't either because it's not that important to them. And it shouldn't be. But I try and make it easy for people to understand just what it is we're looking at, because otherwise it's a series of numbers that just mean nothing to most people. So essentially the code is a cipher. And each number just means something, okay? So this is what our typical account looks like. It's broken up into 5 parts. And each number translates to some kind of verbiage, okay? The first part is our fund. And I always like to think of that as which bank account am I spending from or which credit card am I using? So kind of highest level. The next is location. At schools, that's pretty easy. Is it Eisenhower? Is it Wilson? That's probably the easiest one for everyone to understand. The third piece is object. I like to think of this as what are we buying, right? At home, it would be these types of things. At school districts, the what would be, it could be people, it could be benefits, it could be a service we're buying, utilities. That's the what. The next area is called function. That's the who. So in school districts, the who is social studies, music department. You could think of the function almost as department. Okay. The two things that matter most to people are usually the object. What are we buying? We're buying food. Who's buying the food? Social studies. Right. So those are the two things most important that help you understand everything. And then finally, there's 3 digits at the end. These are almost never used. And the reason is because they're reserved primarily for grants. So when you're looking at a report, you're almost always going to see if you see a project at all, it's going to be 000. That's essentially what we use for non-project. And if there's a number in 3 digits, it's going to be almost always a grant. So ESSER, for instance, we tracked that by its project number. So every piece of the code then means something. So in this case, piece 1 is 10. That's the general fund. 401, right? This is just a made up school district, okay? I know we don't have a Washington high school. But that's the location in this case would be Washington High School. 411, the third piece tells me it's a supply. 124,000. If I had my cipher, I'd look that up and I would say, oh, that's the math department. So the math department was buying supplies at this high school and it's not from a grant.
Okay, may I? Go ahead. Okay, may I?
Sorry. All right. So this is exactly how UWM does all budgeting.
Here's- Okay, and no doubt, Finance Committee has seen this, I've seen this, makes me nuts. You get the spend reports for the month. There is Amazon. All these dollars. What? Or there's the purchasing card from a department director. Pays to the bank. What's it for? 5 years ago, you had to go pull the paper documentation, figure out what are we buying? And does that blind spot, is that addressed here somehow, or can it be addressed?
Is it or can it be? WUFAR is a requirement from the state so that the state can track every school district's expenditure, kind of benchmark themselves. And it says if you buy paper there's certain requirements. So if you buy paper from Staples, that counts as a supply.
Okay.
That's the level of granularity we report to the state on. And I'll kind of take this back to a question earlier about to what extent will the new transparency site help with open records requests? If the open records request is, hey, Scott, tell us how much, I'll say West High School, not Washington, tell us how much West High School spent on supplies, our transparency site will allow them to get that.
Okay.
If they say, how much did West High School spend at Amazon? That's a whole different ball of wax.
But I don't want to know what they spent at Amazon. I want to know what they spent on supplies, and some of that will be from Amazon.
Correct.
Okay. So will it help us there? I mean, I get my own, you know, if you have I don't want to plug for any vendor or whatever, but some places, if you use their purchasing card, their debit card, they'll give you like 6% off or something. Now you get your monthly invoice and there's no detail on what you bought. When I use the other purchasing card, it tells me exactly what the vendor was, and I know from my monthly statement what it was I bought and who in the household bought it. But with Amazon, I just get, it's all Amazon, and what did I spend?
I understand the question. So we have two answers to that. In our ERP system,
okay,
we don't just code it as Amazon. So there it says whatever they bought, Post-its, I don't know. And the account we have with Amazon, we can go to Amazon and look and get it.
And you can see from Amazon, and I can see in my Amazon, I can do the dump of my purchases, and I can see exactly what it is. But if I'm looking at my monthly statement for my Prime card, I can't really see. And that is a problem I had when I was working on the finance committee, and before the finance committee, when I talked to two business managers ago, can I see a payables report for the month? And it was, oh, these purchasing cards, somebody's using this purchasing card a lot. And I asked the business manager, what's this for? Well, we don't really know. From the business manager. And it's like, that's the kind of thing I know you don't want, and I know Dr. Means doesn't want. We need to know where people are spending money. So if you're saying, well, you know, you're buying all this stuff on Amazon, if we went direct to like Staples and bought it directly from Staples and sent it through Amazon, we'd save money. But if you can't see what we're buying on Amazon, you can't know what it is that maybe you can get a better price if you buy direct from the manufacturer itself. That's kind of what am I making sense?
You are. I won't speak for well, I will speak for the person that was here before, whoever that was.
I don't want to criticize anybody.
I know you're not. They were probably trying to say, I don't know right now exactly what that is because I don't have the itemized list in front of me, but yeah.
Well, but that's a lot to do. I mean, that was a problem 15 years ago. Board members say, I want to report on this, and superintendent would take staff offline to produce this custom report. I like this clear.gov thing where somebody can efficiently run a report without spinning all kind of staff people into producing the report. That's what, does this help us? Is there a way you can leverage this to help the finance committee with that kind of thing and help you as well?
You're talking back to the website?
No, I'm talking back to, I'm spending X dollars at Amazon. And I don't know how much of that Amazon stuff is supplies, where if I bought direct from a school supply company like a Staples or a someplace, maybe I get a better price.
So, yeah.
So the process, when somebody places an order through Amazon, it's usually the school directly. They log in, they say, I want to buy these three things. Then they code their own transaction to Amazon. We in the business office are not coding it. We're not saying, oh, everything from Amazon is going to go to this account. The schools know what they're purchasing and they're coding it. So it's up to them to find the best price. Do they want to purchase it from Amazon, or do they want to purchase it from Staples?
Let's not to promote anybody or diss anybody, just to say you have vendor choices.
Yes. And because each school is in charge of their budget, their local school budget, it is in their best interest to find that best price and not just spend money at Amazon because they can.
It's always in somebody's best interest to be smart, but
Yes.
they don't always do it, which is why we manage them.
Mr. Meyer, are you asking if the new system will allow us to see what people are buying from Amazon? Like,
Yeah, that's
I
an
think the answer is
example,
no to that.
right?
Unless Mr. Ecker pulls that data separately, but that's not gonna be available, from my understanding, on the transparency website
From
or
this chart of
through
accounts.
this.
No, I don't even necessarily want it on the website. I would like the board and the administration to be able to see more specificity in this.
I think the administration right now can. You can pull any report and see what exactly we bought.
We can, yeah,
Amazon
we
if
can
you
see
want.
what purchases are going through Amazon.
We can. We have all the data. If the question is the chart of accounts or ClearGov going to make it any easier if a board member were to say, where exactly, what exactly do we buy on Amazon? And was there a better price at Staples? Or anywhere else? The answer is no. That is still going to be manual work.
That's the problem. And if it doesn't solve this, when I've written a chart of accounts for a business, the standard chart of accounts usually didn't let the owner of the business manage according to where he looked at the business. It was more for the standard accounting board people. And it wasn't a cost accounting driven chart of accounts. I mean, I know for myself, I go on these umbrella purchasing sites and I know I'm paying more. But I'm lazy that day and I don't care. So I'm gonna pay 20% more for this thing because I don't want to take the time to price shop around. It's my decision with my money. But if it happens a lot.
I know you're not saying this, but I'm compelled to say it because I've now spent 15 years in school districts and 10 years working with the private sector. At least the private sector companies I worked for, I hope our employees don't spend like the private sector companies I worked for. I have found in every district I've worked in, one, it might be because of why people get into education, but I have found the frugality of school district employees to be beyond anything I would have expected before I came to work for school districts. To the point that there's some things in some districts that I've said we can't do anymore. Things like sharing hotel rooms because they want to save money. Things like people going to a conference and not thinking that they can take a bag with them because that's going to cost $10 more. But that's kind of the general level of frugality that I see.
No, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anybody, but the reason you're here is to manage costs. And if you can't see it, you can't manage it. So these buckets always make me unhappy. They make me unhappy at home with my own personal stuff and make me unhappy here. And it's just the way the world works. There's stuff you just don't have the visibility to. And we do the best we can. And I was hoping somehow this could fix it, but it doesn't.
A way that we are managing it is we have an Amazon business account, so we get better pricing than me as the consumer purchasing it for my home use. So we have
Right. I understand.
but we've tried to implement a policy of, I don't want to call it, it's not a formal policy, a guideline of a teacher can't buy a supply for themselves and then get reimbursed. They need to go through our purchasing process through our Amazon account to get that better pricing rather than
Right. Okay.
taking the lazy,
I was just,
it's easier to just buy it myself.
it's a wonderful thing and I was hoping it was more than it is, but I always hope it's more than it was. And you were warned by Dr. Means that I would be all crazy excited about these questions. And here I was. So I'm done. Thanks.
I was just gonna say that I encountered that policy this afternoon. One of my history teachers was talking about buying a book for the classroom and was talking about how that's something that gets sent off to administrators. They take a look at it. They do some reviews and then they send back, and then maybe at that point you can get reimbursed. But I may be misremembering the details on that.
So, I'm looking at 100,000 line export. There's a column that has these codes in it. So what you're outlining here is a key for what those accounts would be. ClearGov doesn't look like they just have a description. So they don't have what you have there, which you could break it down by school, supplies, and you could compare all the different, like, if you knew all of those, you could write a program or a spreadsheet or something to be able to compare the math departments and what they spent on paper across the different schools to look for an anomaly. If that's what you're into and what you want to spend your time on, great. So that's all there. I guess my question is, do we have, in addition to the demo there, do we have a key and that someone could actually do that translation if they wanted to? And is that on the public website? I'm assuming it's not on ClearGov because that's software as a service and we get what we have there, right?
So this is kind of the give and take of what do we put on our website versus elsewhere. DPI has on their website an Excel downloadable, exactly what you're talking about.
So, but what, in the finance section of our website, if we just put a link to DPI to get to right next to the tracker link, like if you want more information about these codes, here's where you go. And I guess, I wouldn't be worried about overloading our website servers, for people downloading this, but
it's more than me managing it or someone managing it, but the idea of a link is pretty simple.
Sure. But I think your unique slideshow should go on the website if I have my preference. It's okay. I think we've gotten deep. Yes. Yes. I asked that
We might want to change it to X
if
high
board
school so that it doesn't become a new conversation about that.
who are not on the operations and finance committee would like to attend to ask some of these questions, I would encourage you to do so.
Wednesday.
But I'd like to move
You jinxed us by saying this would be a quick item.
You've had enough.
I'm sorry.
Never again.
You've had enough excitement.
Mr. Under, you have been there for a long time. Thank you for you and your staff's work.
I thought there was another item I forgot about.
I was gonna say, we are done with you this evening. Thank you for your work and your reports this evening. I'm gonna ask that we take a 5-minute break before we move into policy.
Okay.
And then we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Standing. Thanks for everybody who stuck with us. We are on second readings and our action to approve policies. We've got 2 different policies this evening to take a look at. And then several first readings as well. I turn it over to my esteemed colleagues. Policy committee.
All right, first one up, policy 2510, second reading, adoption of textbooks, primary curricular resources. And basically in here from our most recent committee meeting on 12/16, it was a renewal recommendation for basically legal keeping the suggested language as is to align with federal requirements.
Let's go ahead and read this one.
It is recommended that the school board approve policy 2510, adoption of textbooks, primary curricular resources, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Quick. Board questions or discussions on this? Seeing none? Someone's please call the roll.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Dr. Hoik?
Yes.
Mr. Wadier?
Yes.
Dr. Worley?
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes, and that item passes. We also have second reading on
Second policy.
All right, second policy up, policy 2521, selection of instructional materials and equipment equipment supplemental to curricular resources. Similar same case that we had for 2521. Neil recommends keeping the suggested language as is to align with federal requirements.
Mr. What here?
It is recommended that the school board approve policy 2521, selection of instructional materials and equipment supplemental curricular resources, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Morrell. Any board questions or discussion on the sentence? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig.
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessefinger.
Yes, this item also passes. Thank you. And then we have several first readings. No action taken this evening, but there's no substantive updates. It'll go on the consent agenda. It's not, it'll come back for a second.
Right. Okay. First reading, policy 5410, promotion, placement, and retention. And so for our previous notes here, the policy was brought to us for review at our December 16th policy committee meeting. And from that, we basically had notes that from our consultation with Dr. Zimmern, noted that by law, we must have this promotion policy for students in grades 4 and 8.
Questions from the board?
I just had a question. If there's discussions, I'll just say, why did you consider having part E as the policy to have the principal as the final responsibility for determining the promotion? It sounds like it's always a group of professionals making the decision. So what happens if they can't come to consensus for a student's promotion?
That's a good topic to bring back to policy committee. I think, yeah, but it's you're gonna jump.
No, I don't.
I think I've seen some policies where there's a final arbiter of some sort where, so we can let us talk as a team and we can bring it back.
Is it the case that whatever the decision is, somebody needs to sign? One person, could that be what this is? That the principal, you know what I'm saying?
I'm hearing from Ms. Heimer Rollins.
I understand. Yeah.
Yep, that the current way that the policy language is reading is that it relies and depends silently on consensus. And at some point, the policy may need to have a final arbiter of some sort. So I think that's a really interesting perspective to put on the table.
Yeah, I only say this because, as the role of board clerk, for example, you sign things. You aren't the one who's doing the deciding on the calculations and the such, but somebody's got to sign it. Yeah, okay. But maybe that's not the case. I don't know.
We'll bring it up next.
Yeah.
Good feedback. Moving on to first reading of policy 5420, reporting student progress.
I was just gonna say, though, back to that one is that, could this be the difference, Dr. Means, between a policy and administrative guideline? Should the policy have a determinant?
Yes.
That would just be my question in reading that second list. There are more about administrative guidelines, and we might have that in an administrative guidelines. But it's worth the discussion.
It's worth the discussion because when you're having the conversation about promotion, the more clarity you can create in the policy for families, the better.
I think it might be.
I agree.
You're taking one, I like it. Thank you. All right, 5420, reporting student progress. From our prior committee meetings, it's a current policy and it's just updated for current standards. Moving forward to first reading of policy 5421, grading. Another here that's current policy updated for current standards.
Usually when we say current standards, that means the wording. Most of these, what you see in green, it's just we're using our new current wording.
Moving on to policy 5451, student recognition. So, like we said there, for the current wording, current policy updated for the current standards or our current wording. The 5451.01 Wisconsin Academic Excellence Scholarship.
I do have a question about this one.
Go ahead.
Are these specific requirements to qualify? Are these set out by the state of Wisconsin or these are, okay, I can see Dr. Marvel nodding yes. Well, that's unfortunate because I don't like them.
Yeah, so for our most recent meeting there, the notes for their senior status refers to a student who has been in attendance for 2 semesters in junior year and the first semester in the senior year.
We talked about this a little bit.
Yeah. I think you weren't the only one.
Can work on advocacy on that.
We had quite a discussion on the 7th semester.
Further, we'll move on to 5451.02 technical excellence higher education scholarships. Same here, per the most recent committee meeting on 12/16, current policy updated for current standards in our wording. Moving on to policy 5463, credits from non-public schools. So for the most recent meeting, our current policy was updated for current standards, and students transferring in from non-public schools will not count toward our district GPA. And then let's see, 113. One. 63. Ready to go there?
I have a question about that. Why aren't those grades considered as their GPA or class ranking?
The discussion we had at policy committee was that for some of non-public schools, rating can look a lot different. The standards that they are assessed against, they don't necessarily need to follow the standards that are set out by the state.
Is this what's typical in Wisconsin schools or public schools?
All right, moving on to policy 5505, academic integrity. And then most recent here, this is one where this policy replaces the recently rescinded policy 2200. Final one, first reading of policy 6236, Community Services Fund, Fund 80. We added language to see the policy 2450 for community and adult education.
Something that was asked previously, like several months ago, we finally got to the policy.
It's long.
Thank you all very much. Sounds like most of these will come back on the consent agenda. We now are at the point of adjourning into executive closed session. Dr. Willie.
It is recommended that the school board adjourn into executive closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parens 1, parens C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation of data of any public school employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically to discuss the superintendent's performance evaluation and pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parens 1, parens E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, specifically to deliberate regarding the terms of a charter school agreement between the Board of Education and Wauwatosa STEM Incorporated, and I so move.
Member second.
Second.
Mr. Colerole?
Mr. Morris, Yes. Dr. Hoik,
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Burley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. Thank you all. For those of you who will be departing, have a wonderful evening and get home safe. And we will move, safe for a second.